Well, it's 11 o'clock. Let's get started. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our SeedFast webinar series on financing rounds. I am joined by Alain Friedrich, whom you can also see in the picture, who will be discussing this series together with me. He's a lawyer, notary, and partner at Lex Futura, which is a law firm specializing in startups and tech companies. My name is Dominik Witz. I'm a co-founder of Konsento, which is a legal tech platform specializing in digital corporate action. Together, Lex Futura and Konsento, we have launched the SeedFast initiative, which supports founders in the preparation and implementation of their pre-seed and seed financing rounds. And pre-seed and seed financing rounds are also the topic of our webinar series. Over the next couple of weeks, we will be highlighting all the key steps of a financing round in a 2-week cycle so that you are well prepared for your upcoming round. In today's session, Alain will first show you what the important steps and stages of a financing round are. And then in the coming weeks, we will then go deeper in those individual steps and elaborate them one by one. But now I have spoken enough, and I'm happy to hand over to you, Alain, and I'm curious to see which steps are included in a financing round.
Thank you, Dominik, and a very warm welcome from my side as well. As Dominik said, in the upcoming, 9 webinars, we're going to talk about each step of a financing round. And in the end, we're going to show you as well how SeedFast is going to support you with a fixed price product. But let's start in the beginning. What are the different steps of a financing round? We have only one slide today, but it encompasses all the different steps, and I'm going to talk about them in a quite high-level review, but it's important to understand that a financing round is not a simple one-step process. It involves very different actors and very many different steps. So when does a financing round start? Usually, you have contact to investors. You talk to them, they might express some interest, and we call that stage the pre-term sheet conversation. That's right at the beginning. At this stage, you rarely need legal support. Sometimes you need an NDA if the investor is signing one. If not, you don't really need legal support. But once you come to the term sheet stage, that means that if an investor signs a soft commitment and tells you, hey, I'm interested in investing in you or in your company, then it's important to be aware that the term sheet is one of the most important documents in the entire financing round. Why? Because the term sheet sets the tone for future negotiations. It is not non-binding, but it's very uncommon to deviate from the terms in the term sheet. So the term sheet covers stuff like what's the investment amount, what's the valuation of the companies, the so-called pre-money valuation, what kinds of information rights does the investor want, what kinds of veto rights, is there a vesting for the founders, the usual common clauses such as the drag-along clause, the tag-along clause, who is bearing the costs of the financing round. Here may be some practical insights. Usually the lead investor gets reimbursed up to a certain threshold of his legal and consulting costs, maybe 10, 15,000, if these costs arise, get reimbursed by the company. Stuff like this is already in the term sheet and has to be negotiated at this stage and not at the later final documentation stage, because if there are major roadblocks, you have to talk about these roadblocks in the beginning and not after having discussed other things for 5-6 weeks. So term sheet is very important. Once the term sheet is signed, usually there are 2 different work streams. The one work stream is the legal due diligence. Depending on the sophistication of the investors, he's doing that by him or herself, or he's also involving lawyers or other professionals that assist the investors in the due diligence. He's basically checking the status of the company and is trying to minimize the information asymmetry in the beginning. Here, it's good for you to know that if you try or if you want to raise funds, you should set up a professional data room. We're going to talk about this in the later webinar where we in particular talk about legal due diligence, but it's just important you have to have your documents in order. It's quite an important thing. The other work stream is the preparation and negotiation of the shareholders agreement and the investment agreement. You might have heard the two terms, particularly the shareholders agreement. That's an agreement among the shareholders, the investor, and the company. What the common terms of the shareholders agreement are, we're going to talk about it in one of the next webinars. The investment agreement is basically a purchase contract. It obligates the company and the existing shareholders to issue shares and the investor to pay in a certain amount of money or convert its convertible loan into equity. That's the first part of the investment agreement. And the second part mainly contains representation and warranties. So basically confirmations about the state of the company. We're going to go into details here as well in a later webinar. Once the due diligence has finished and some of the findings might have been included in the investment agreement or the shareholders agreement, these documents are signed. Usually the signing is done by electronic signatures. Quite important here, it's not done yet. Because after signing the investment agreement and the shareholders agreement, Dominik, this is time for the closing. And this is where Konsento supports you guys. You want to take over and show the spectators or the listeners what Konsento does in the closing?
Yes, sure. Happy to do so. Exactly. Well, before we begin with the closing, we need to prepare for the closing. And actually, the preparing of the closing is the aspect that takes the most time. When we do the closing, we need to take corporate resolutions by the annual general meeting or the extraordinary general meeting by the shareholders, who then approve the capital increase. We need one or several board meetings, and we need to prepare many, many documents. We will elaborate on this also at a later webinar, but all those steps need to be prepared during the preparation phase of the closing. And this takes a lot of time. Once we have all those preparations made, the closing itself is then a matter of a couple of minutes or at least hours. And until you have the entry in the commercial register, it's a couple of days. Until then also, the capital will be released. Yeah, having said that, we need to elaborate, or we will elaborate on all those steps, and they are crucial because if there is one mistake in those documents or in the resolutions, we will need to go back to step one or square one. And therefore, we'll be happy to elaborate on all those steps at a later stage.
Maybe, Dominik, let me interrupt a little bit. Why SeedFast? You will see that in our later webinars. The preparation for closing, as Dominik said, is one of the most time-consuming aspects of the financing round. No one would think that, but depending on the amount of investors you have to set up, let's say, 10, 15 subscription forms. The content of these subscription forms have to be correct. So they have to be correct up to the cent, and all these numbers have to add up to the public deed, which will be notarized with the notary public. And it's quite a complex process, which a lot of people forget. A lot of people think the investment agreement and the shareholders agreement, it's done with that, but unfortunately not. The more complex, maybe it's not complex, but it's more administrative, cumbersome, is the closing itself. And once you do the notarization, as Dominik pointed out, you have to apply or submit all the documents to the commercial registry. And the commercial registry is going to check all the different details. This sounds quite simple, but believe me, if you have a mistake of 1 cent, you're not going to get to the money because the commercial registry is going to say, hey, there's a mistake, please correct it. So having the entire process in line and be as specific as possible and as correct as possible is very important, because only once the application is made and the entry, so the new shares are issued in the financing rounds, only then you have the release of capital. So it's quite important that the entire process is going as quickly as possible, but you also have to expect some time here. I mean, I just closed one round there. It took 4 months from term sheet to closing, not because we were especially slow, but because there were negotiations with the investor, other investors joined. So when you prepare for a financing round, you all have to bear in mind that you won't get to the money within 2 weeks, usually. So bear in mind that when you do the financial planning, you really have to have a lot of time that you have to calculate for the financing round. Yes, Dominik, that was a very short overview of the different steps of a financing round. For us, it's important that in the beginning you understand the entire timeline. In the next webinar, we're going to go into more detail, and Dominik is going to tell you about the different types of capital increases. Because when you do a financing round, there's not just one type of capital increase, there's several. So Dominik, maybe you go into the next slide. On the 19th of March, again at 11 a.m., we have another webinar, or the next webinar in our series. There are a total of 9, where we talk about the different types, and Dominik is going to explain to you what types of capital increases there are. So Dominik, I guess it's time for questions if there are any, or maybe you have one.
Yes, no, there is one. And namely, when we look at the time scale, we see that the different steps of a capital increase seem to be evenly distributed. However, in reality, there may be some different time efforts for each of those steps. Can you please elaborate a little bit in context of planning a financial round? Which steps need to be considered more and, have more time reserved for in the planning?
Although usually it's, I have to start in another way, because there are negotiations involved, more time is reserved up to the signing, because people often have to set up halls, they have to negotiate the agreements, maybe there are some other investors joining, maybe there is some miscommunication going on. So up to the signing, a lot of time is reserved. Once the signing is done, everyone expects the closing to take place more or less immediately, especially people who are not familiar with the complexity that the closing involves. So we and us, we usually do a parallel process. If there are investors joining, we already set up their account on Konsento, we prepare the subscription form. So the closing can take place within, let's say, 2 weeks after signing, depending on the amount of time the people need to pay in the money. Because the money they pay into a blocked account, that's preparation for closing and based on the investment agreement. Sometimes this takes longer and sometimes this takes less long, but usually up to the signing, more time is reserved. And maybe the relationship between the term sheet and the final documents, the term sheet usually has a goal. I usually say within 45 days, we want to sign the investment agreement, or 30 days. So you already set up the timeline at the term sheet stage if you do it correctly, because then everyone knows how quick people need to work.
Thank you. Just looking if we have other questions, which does not seem to be the case. Well, no, there are no further questions. Let's make a quick outlook and tell you why this next webinar is also of importance for you. So when you're preparing your pre-seed or seed funding round, choosing the right type of capital is crucial. And it's also a very strategic decision. And we will find out which type of capital increase best suits your financial strategy and your individual situation. Yes, thank you, Alain, for elaborating on the different steps of a capital increase in the financing round. And we're happy to see you again in 2 weeks.
Yeah, me too. I'm looking forward to
it. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.